Geeks and geekettes, gats and gittens, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, comic aficionados the world over. I'm Chuck Dixon. I'm here to answer your questions about what I do for a living. No math, no grammar, nothing difficult, just questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. And we got some awesome questions this week. Thank you. A lot of these came from Facebook, because I sent a call out. I need questions, and you answered in droves. You people are awesome. Robert Mullen, how did you end up doing a Star Wars story? Well, I never wanted to write Star Wars because it was a franchise I enjoyed until recently. It was a franchise I enjoyed, and I didn't want to have to think about it as a writer thinks about. So it was something I just wanted to recreationally take in rather than have a professional interest in. So it kind of like, it's like Star Wars, James Bond, a couple of other franchises that I just want to enjoy as a consumer. But I was approached to write this General Grievous miniseries by Dark Horse. I believe it was Dave Land was the editor, and I had done some really, he'd given me the opportunity to do some really cool work at Dark Horse previous to this. And we enjoyed our working relationship. And he reached out and he said, would you want to write a Star Wars thing? And I told him the same thing I just told you. And I said, well, what would it be? And he says, well, it's about General Grievous. And then I had to think again, because I had been watching the Clone Wars shorts on Cartoon Network, I believe. Or whether they're on TNT, I don't remember, or TBS. One of the Turner channels was showing these Clone Wars shorts that were only like 3 minutes long. And I really liked them. And I saw General Grievous had just been introduced to the public. And I thought, wow, this is a cool character. I want to know more about him. And so they offered me this General Grievous mini. And I ended up writing it. I ended up having a good time. It sailed through Lucasfilm pretty easily. The only thing they wanted changed was I have a frozen planet, and I thought, well, why not set it on Hoth? But they objected because this was the prequels, and we hadn't seen Hoth yet. I think they were thinking of the characters as if it was like a meta decision, really, because they were thinking of the characters as if they existed outside of the movies. And it was like, well, Hoth obviously was a thing before Empire Strikes Back, so wouldn't Hoth be a planet within, the area of interest of these characters previous to that? It's not like Hoth suddenly appeared out of nowhere just in time for them to build a rebel base on it in Empire. But I didn't argue. They're Lucasfilm. It's their toys. They're just letting me play with it. So I just had to change the name of the planet. Made up some BS planet name. And but I had a good time. The interesting, well, maybe only interesting to me, was at the time I was writing this, Gary Oldman was supposed to provide the voice for General Grievous. I don't know what happened there. He ended up not doing it. Or maybe he did it and they didn't like it and they replaced him. But in my mind, I kept hearing Gary Oldman, the strangled Gary Oldman voice as General Grievous. And but it was cool. I mean, I got to work with Rick Leonardi. I always love working with Rick, and he did an incredible job on this. So my one foray into Star Wars, and it was a good time. All right. On to another disappointing franchise. Sean Hoffman. I was very disappointed. Boy, disappointment is the word, man. Well, it's better to be disappointed than depressed. Okay? Disappointment is a natural human occurrence. We can all get over it. Anyway, I was very disappointed with Disney's handling of John Carter, though I liked the movie itself well enough. Have you read Herb's Mars series? And if you liked it, you have an opinion on the movie, etc. Yeah, I was a huge aficionado of the Mars series. I read it perfect age. I was like 13, 14, 15 years old as I worked my way through the series. I was reading Lord of the Rings at the same time. I would read one of the Lord of the Rings books and then take a break, read a couple of John Carters before diving back in to Middle Earth. And And yeah, I mean, it's my second favorite series after the Pellucidar series. I really dig the Pellucidar series a lot. But the Mars series, fantastic, epic stuff. Violent, incredibly violent series. I once asked Bern Hogarth, the Tarzan artist, at a con. I was a young punk, young comics nerd, with more nerve than sense. And I just asked him. I said, I know you've done a lot of work on Tarzan. Have you ever thought of doing John Carter? And Bern Hogarth just said, I don't like John Carter. It's a story of annihilation. I was like, well, that's kind of what I like about it. It's kind of bleak. It's a dying planet. And John Carter is there with his sword and his gun, taking care of business. And it is a little bleak. And as I said, extraordinarily violent story. Now we come to the movie. And I mean, it looked good. What's this guy's name? I can't remember his name. He's a really good actor. He's a really good action actor. I really liked him. Unfortunately, I think he was in like 3 duds in a row. So he's relegated to being a character actor for the rest of his life, the poor guy. Is it Taylor Hitch? Do I have that right? I'm not sure. Anyway, it doesn't matter, except to him and his agent. Yeah, it looked good. I thought, the guy putting it together, he was a Pixar guy. It was obviously an earnest attempt, and the problem with it for audiences, I think, is it looked derivative, which is sad because so many things we see in Star Wars and other places is actually derivative of John Carter. But because Carter never made it to the big screen, a lot of this looks like it was borrowed from earlier works when the opposite is true. And but my biggest problem with the movie, and I think one of the reasons it contributed to its failure, is that the movie opens on Mars. So we get to see the ships of helium and this fight and the landscape, and just the exotic, violent, brutal nature of Burroughs' Mars before John Carter sees it. And if you read the novels, you read any Burroughs, it's always about the journey. It's always about the exploration. It's always about what's around the next corner. What is the new horror or delight that I'm about to see? What experiences am I going to share with this character who's always a fish out of water? He's always a stranger in a strange land. And that element was removed from the film because we get to see Mars before John Carter. We don't share his discovery because we've already been there. And I think it was a major mistake. And I don't know, was it Andrew Stanton? I think it was Andrew Stanton behind this. I don't know if he just didn't understand that. I can't understand a Pixar guy who didn't understand that would kill the story. Take away a lot of the sense of wonder. I mean, it's like writing a murder mystery and showing us the murderer at the beginning. There was no voyage of discovery for Carter, and I think a lot of the drama is leached out of the story because of that. I want to give the director, the shadow of the doubt that maybe the studio said, yeah, this is okay, but we need to see Mars sooner. We need to open on action, which is a mistake. You already got got them to buy the damn movie ticket. They're in the seat. You got them now. They can't wait 20 minutes for some Mars action. But yeah, that cold opening just, for me, ruined the film. I'll have to rewatch it and just skip the cold opening and see how I feel about it. I also thought that the introduction to John Carter and the rest was unnecessarily bleak. When you read Burroughs' version, it has more of a hi-ho adventure aspect, where we basically go from a common Western scenario of a lone man being pursued by Apaches who goes to this mysterious cave where he, for some, amazing reason, wakes up on the planet Mars. If they had kept that aspect of it, but I think it was unnecessarily grim, the opening. I don't understand the reason for that, to open the film as dour as they did. Because then there's no contrast with when he shows up on Mars, because things are pretty bleak on Mars as well. So yeah, I think story structure, I think that was the biggest problem. His opening with a bunch of strange characters we've never seen before, and basically spoiling all the surprises that were in store for John Carter, because they'd already been revealed to us. Will there ever be a good John Carter movie made? Well, not for the foreseeable future, because this movie was such a spectacular bomb for the studio that I really don't even want them to touch it again, because if they were tempted to touch it, they would slash the budget to conserve risk, and who wants that? It'd be like the Starship Troopers sequels, which have a fraction of the budget of the original. It just seems like a slow, sad death for the franchise. I'd rather to just not touch it ever again. Just stay off of Mars, Disney. John, Morgan, Bat Neal, I don't think I've heard you talk about Atlas Seaboard. What did you think of them, particularly the war comics? Atlas Seaboard was a comic company that sort of sprung up in the early 70s or mid-70s, for those of you who don't know. It was started up by a guy who basically left Marvel to start a competing comic book company. And they were newsstand comics. And I don't know the whole story behind Atlas. I wish somebody would write a book about it. They did some interesting stuff, and they had a really good beginning, and then it all just sort of dwindled away into mediocrity. Some really unusual titles. Planet of the Vampires, high concept story, where these basically Planet of the Apes with vampires. These people traveling through space wind up on a planet ruled by bloodsuckers, and there's a great Russ Heath issue in the run. But other than that, other than the fact that it's just, crazy, high concept, gonzo, Roger Corman kind of story, there's not a whole lot to recommend it. Although it's fun. It was a fun comic. But like so many Atlas comics, the quality sort of wore away. The Destructor is another one. It starts out with Wally Wood and Steve Ditko working together. It's a great looking comic, but it's kind of a generic superhero, and that was a lot of the problems at Atlas. They vary between really wild, high concepts and just sort of ho-hum material. Although, the books looked good, and they all started out well. Wolf the Barbarian was cool. It was a Larry Hama creation with written and penciled by Larry with help from his pals at the Continuity Studio, Neil Adams Studio, to finish it. And I don't know if they stopped paying, the money ran out, cash flow, whatever. But by issue 3, Larry was gone and replaced once again by sort of guys who were kind of phoning it in. But Wolf the Barbarian had such a great beginning because it was Larry Hama, so it was pretty brutal. It was a mean comic, which was neat. It was no holds barred barbarian adventure with no apologies, and it just sort of became a sword and sandals slash fest for its last couple of issues, which are nowhere near the quality of the first two. Even sadder was Scorpion, which was a Howard Chaykin creation, written and drawn by Howard, and it was one of his, period pulp pastiche adventurers, macho adventurer and attractive women and crazy scenarios and all kinds of stuff. And pretty soon Howard was gone, and the Scorpion morphed into a modern day, placeholder superhero, run-of-the-mill, by-the-numbers junk. Which is weird because it went from issue 1, Howard Chaykin, classic material, to issue 4, crap you wouldn't give your nephew to read. And you got to wonder, why? They wouldn't even have known the sales figures on these things until it was time to launch the 4th issue. So, on almost every title in the Atlas catalog, they were making massive changes to the titles within the first 3 issues. And there's they were making like Dan DiDio level bad decisions on how to make the character more popular at a time when they couldn't possibly have had any idea how popular the character was. I mean, they couldn't have been seeing the newsstand returns, and these were newsstand comics. They could not have been seeing the newsstand returns at the time they were making the changes. They would not simply would not have known how well or how poorly these comics were doing. And I'd love to see the sales figures. I mean, they may have, peed in the pool. They may have thrown the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, they may have had a runaway hit comic that they simply ruined by making last-minute 11th hour changes. But there's a lot of like gems, diamonds in the rough within the Atlas catalog. Morlock 2000 morphed into Morlock 2000 and the Midnight Men. I couldn't, if you held a gun to my head, tell you what this comic book was about. I think I forgot it the minute I was done reading it. But the wonderful thing about this issue, which I believe is the third or fourth issue, is it's Steve Ditko, inked by Bernie Wrightson. And it's awesome to behold. Wrightson was obviously in fanboy heaven, and he does the best inking on Ditko outside of Ditko in his prime that I've ever seen. It surprised me because I am a fan of both artists, and it surprised me how well they married in styles. How Wrightson knew what to do. He knew what to ink and what not to ink. He knew how to bring out primo Ditko in the inking. He definitely didn't phone it in. It's obvious on every page. It's a true labor of love. And but my favorite of all of the things they published were these two issues, sadly only two issues, of thrilling adventure stories, both of which feature a Russ Heath story. There's a terrific Archie Goodwin, Walt Simonson samurai story in one of these, a John Severin story. There's a Frank Thorne story about Lawrence of Arabia. I mean, really cool stuff. Basically what the kind of magazine that Larry Hama would do when he rebooted Savage Tales. It was all war and western and crime, and there was a jungle hero character in it. And these are really cool. Man, were they hard to find. I think that was part of the problem Atlas had. I mean, there was a urban legend, probably true, that Marvel, particularly Marvel, did everything they could to limit distribution of the Atlas comics because they felt betrayed. And Atlas was obviously going for the Marvel audience. You can tell by the look of the covers and the rest of it. And a lot was done to limit distribution. And I can tell you, as a fan, trying to find these damn things at drugstores and 7-Elevens, that I rode many, many, many miles on my bike, tracking down each and every issue. And I only ever saw these thrilling adventure stories in one drugstore, which oddly was right near where I was living. This is cool stuff. And I know there was a third issue of Thrilling Adventure Stories planned because I have a Russ Heath original page of a Western story that he did for that issue. Beautiful, beautiful work on craft tint board. But sadly, Atlas went away. I don't know the reasons. I didn't bother to research. I'm just going from a fan's perspective, from somebody who was, going to the newsstands and seeing these things come out. But obviously something was very deeply wrong with this company from the very beginning. It's sad. It's a J. Morgie twin spin. Here's your second question, buddy. Who did the best Tarzan comic books? Dell, Gold Key, Charlton, DC, Marvel, or Dark Horse? Well, the Marvel ones were boring. And Dark Horse, he was a vegetarian. Give me a break. So I think undoubtedly the most accurate, most loyal, most loving adaptation of the first Burroughs novels has to go to Joe Kubert. These are, once again, a labor of love. These are wonderfully realized. Joe did a great job of adapting the novels to the graphic novel form, and he brings all the Joe Kubert strengths to it. This organic feel of real environments and elements, rain and darkness and lightning storms. And plus, Joe he just drew animals marvelously. It's a wonderful series. And as I said, it's the most accurate adaptation outside of the novels I think we'll ever see. If they made a movie as powerful as these comics, it would be a blockbuster, international blockbuster. But that'll never happen because Tarzan becomes more and more unaccepted by our ruling class as the years go on. Everything about Tarzan offends them. And so we're never really going to see an earnest adaptation of Burroughs. So this is as close as you're ever going to get. Now, near and dear to my heart, and it is tough to choose between the two. I love Russ Manning's interpretation of Tarzan. He did some adaptations, but for the most part, he wrote his own stories. And outside of Burroughs, they're the best Tarzan stories ever. He really got what Burroughs was about with the Gold Key comics, as well as the many years he spent doing the daily and Sunday Tarzan comic strips, which are marvelous. Manning was a terrific draftsman, had a lot of passion for the work. And as I said, he took Burroughs's concepts and he either revisited things, and he often revisited Opar and Paladon and places that Burroughs created, but then he would expand and explore beyond those. And he also did a pair of excellent graphic novels, I think, which were initially produced by a company in England, because the Tarzan Weekly comic was a huge seller over there, and a lot of the work inside of that was Russ Manning, reprints of Russ Manning work. But Manning got it, from the art to the story. They're just marvelous reads. If you're a Burroughs fan, you got to take a look at these. And thankfully, American Comics Library, or Library of American Comics, has done some gorgeous, gorgeous hardcover reprints of these Sundays and dailies. I got to mention in passing, I'd heard for years, mostly from comic artists, about Jesse Marsh's long run on Tarzan at Dell back in the 50s. And, I found a collection for cheap just to check it out, because so many great artists said that they were inspired by this guy. But at first glance, this stuff kind of looks simplistic and unfinished and crude in some spots. And then I started reading the stories, all written by Gaylord Dubois, and I was just drawn in. They're like salted peanuts. I had to read. And so I ended up getting all of these different volumes that Dark Horse reprinted of Jesse Marsh's run on Tarzan. And it is deserving of admiration. Sometimes you don't see what an artist sees until you look very, very closely. And you can see the storytelling is clean and crisp. The stories themselves, written by Gaylord Dubois, are engaging. They're aimed primarily at children, but as I often say, you can't fool children. You got to have story. You got to have plot. And these stories did have plot. They had suspense and engagement and character development and all the rest of it, but all done in a nearly European style, European level of sophistication. And, if you're just reading them casually, I'm sure kids didn't think of them as sophisticated, but they are. Marsh didn't draw anything he didn't have to draw. Dubois didn't write anything in the story that would clutter the story up or get in the way. And they're just solid, either adventure or mystery stories or suspense stories, or just pure action stories. And I found a great deal of variety within the plot lines. And they did these for, a decade. So there's tons of this Tarzan material by Dubois and Marsh, and I have learned to appreciate it. Drew North, specifically about comics, does it make you uncomfortable when your name gets credited with something you had no part of? I'll skim places like Amazon or League of Comic Geeks and notice that your name comes up a lot, even though you had no involvement with the characters used or stories being told. Well, that's weird. I like to see my name on a comic, but generally only ones I did. So yeah, I don't know. I've never run into this. I've never run into a reference to a comic I didn't work on with my name on it. I've been handed lots of comics to sign that I didn't work on. And I always I used to politely say, I didn't work on this. I don't even do that anymore. If you want me to sign it, I'll sign it. It doesn't matter to me. It's your decision. It's your comic. So, because we used to explain it, I didn't work on this, and I never had anybody say, well, then don't sign it. I've always had them say, sign it anyway. I don't care. And League of Comic Geeks is something new to me. It's a phone app about comics. I will have to put this on my phone and take a peek. I had no idea it existed. It's probably got bajillions of followers, and here I am in the dark. And then as far as Amazon goes, who the hell knows with their credits? They'll often solicit stuff that I worked on. And once upon a time, they made it very easy for you to tell Amazon, hey, I worked on this, and then be added to the credits. Because, I want to promote it. And, and if my name's on it, it makes it easier for me to help promote it. But they've made that a more difficult, typical Amazon process where you end up, going round and round in circles and getting nowhere, having looked at scores and scores of web pages that tell you to fill in this and fill in that and check here and hit this tab, and you just end up back where you started. So I don't bother anymore. The recent solicitation for the sigil, cross-gen sigil omnibus does not have me on it, even though I wrote the bulk of the omnibus. But, what are you going to do? So, it's a 1,000 and some page omnibus, and I wrote over 500 pages of it, but my name isn't on it. The names that are on it are people who wrote and drew maybe 2 or 3 issues, or 1 issue, but it's Amazon. No one knows the mysterious workings of Mr. Bezos's bizarre little enterprise. Now, if you want credits where credit is due, to coin a phrase, if you want proper, accreditation of comics, you got to go to Grand Comic Book Database. I go there all the time. And if you use it, if you end up loving it, throw some money their way. I do. I pluck images off there all the time. And it is the most accurate, the most well-researched, the most meticulously put together comic book database you can imagine. And why is that? Because it's done by fans. I've done some contributing here. I've scanned comic book covers and sent them over. It's just an amazing. So it's a rabbit hole. You start looking around on this site, you're not gonna look up, for a couple of hours. It's an amazing place. I don't know if they have a phone app. They should. They could probably make some real dough if Grand Comic Book Database was a phone app. It would blow that. I don't even know about the League of Comic Geeks, but I can assure you this would blow them out of the water as far as true nerd nirvana. Adam Mowick. I thought I'm always making fun of your name. I'm sorry. Is it Movic? The umlaut throws me. I love the umlaut, but it throws me. I thought Batman Finding Joe Chill was only on Earth 2. And wouldn't have been wiped out from continuity post-crisis. I don't know anything about post-crisis, pre-crisis. I never understood any of that stuff. It never mattered because when I was at DC, I was working for Denny O'Neil, so none of that touched us. But I can say I famously don't agree with the idea that Batman should ever have found out who killed his parents. I think the creation of the character Joe Chill was an enormous mistake. This is a later iteration of a scene done, way back in the 50s of Batman finding Joe Chill. I think Dick Sprang or Charles Paris drew the original story. So, and when I read that story as a kid, I read it in a reprint. It was this paperback, this cheesy little paperback that they put out when the Batman TV series was on the air. And when I read the Joe Chill story, I was stunned. Because I'm like, wow, I never thought Batman knew who killed his parents. And now I'm sorry I know. And then I realized the reason why I thought that is because I thought, well, why would Batman keep being Batman if he avenged his parents? What the hell's all that about? So whether Joe Chill happened on Earth 2 or Earth 1, in my mind it happened on Earth 1 because that's the comics I was reading. And clearly here, this is Earth 1. Although maybe is there an Earth 2 Batman? I don't know, and frankly don't care. I do remember that Earth 2 was often used as a total dodge by writers who had written themselves into a corner. You know, the editor had assigned them this shocking cover, and then they had to, somehow get the whole series back to status quo by the last panel. And the most egregious example of this was when I was a kid, they had a story where Alfred dies. And it's like, whoa, I got to read this. Alfred, not Alfred. I don't want Alfred to die. And he does die, and he's really dead. But Batman goes over to Earth 2 and gets Earth 2 Alfred and brings him over. And I'm like, and as a kid, I'm like, what? You can just... You've brought another Alfred, but that's not the original Alfred. That's not the same guy. It's a guy from a parallel universe. And what about the parallel universe you took him from? Doesn't that Batman now no longer have an Alfred? I mean, the ethics of it are mind-boggling. I mean, what the hell? But that was, Silver Age DC. What are you going to do about it? The Earth 2 thing only ever appealed to me, the multiverse thing only ever appealed to me when the JSA and the JLA would meet every summer in kind of a intertemporal crossover where the DC heroes of the past would join the DC heroes of the present for whatever reason. And when I was a kid, I liked it because it's like, hey, the more superheroes, the better. This is cool. It was cool, goofy fun, and for years they were the only issues of Justice League I bought, which I guess is the reason why they did it. Probably wasn't the only fan who only bought Justice League during the 2-part summer Earth 2 extravaganza. And but for the most part, I found the Earth 2 stuff boring, and here's a reason. I mean, look at that page where Batman's explaining alternate universes to everybody and what's going on, and then the JSA on the other page are explaining it once again for the readers on Earth 2. I don't know. I mean, superheroes and parallel universes and alternate realities, it's all part of the mishmash crazy conceit of superheroes, just like, flying people and people who can turn invisible and all the rest of that stuff. But for most part, as long as it's utilized in the story to make the story entertaining, I'm fine with it. But as far as following it, like, what happened on Earth 2 or Earth 3, or, did this quote unquote really happen, meaning happening on Earth 1, I just got lost and remain lost and remain kind of apathetic about it. So just give me a good story. Stop explaining stuff. Okay. Comics Gatekeeper. I was a teenager in the 90s and I adored the Marvel books of the era. I'm probably viewing the time with rose-tinted glasses. Well, don't we all? But I was wondering what you thought was the best and worst of 90s books, not just issues and runs, but general trends you loved or hated. Well, I'm not going to get into the whole 90s. I'm just going to look at Marvel because you mentioned Marvel. I'm going to pretend you only asked me about Marvel. And maybe you are only asking me about Marvel, but I'm going to tell you what I think of the 90s Marvel stuff. Which is only fair because I was so much a part of DC in the 90s. I'm kind of too close to that subject. My favorite thing in the 90s was Larry Hama and Mark Silvestri's run on Wolverine. Just awesome stuff. It surprised me each month that Larry was still on the book, allowed to do what he was doing. Just crazy, hyperactive, nutso stories that if you knew Larry, it's like, wow, I can see where this came from. He would do historical stuff. Whatever was on Larry's mind, he put in there. Whatever his interests were, Wolverine would eventually encounter. And what I loved about it was he created rafts of villains, just really bad, nasty, fully realized villains, and then they would die. And I remember thinking, man, Larry, you have the guts of a burglar to create a character this cool and then just kill him off. when other creators would have resuscitated them, brought them back to life somehow. And but yeah, him and Silvestri, and then Silvestri left to go to Image, and Larry continued with other artists, and the series remained excellent because of Larry's crazy gonzo approach to the subject matter. His run on Wolverine is probably the only X-Men related thing I've ever really, truly 100% enjoyed. And of course, adjunct to that is Larry's miniseries of Sabretooth with Mark Texiera on art. And this is like nuts. This series was crazy in a good way. It's like Larry on some sort of steroids. I imagine that Larry thought, well, I got Mark Texiera. I'm going to go full Tex on this. I'm going to strain even his ability to be wild and crazy on the comic book page. And this series is seriously wacky in a good way. And it's really, really violent. I don't remember if it was code or not. If it was code, it stretched the very boundaries of the comics code because it was extraordinarily violent. And there was a lot of, I'm not going to say sexual material, but I'm going to say sexualized material in it. Surprising for a comic of this era, especially under Tom DeFalco's watch, because that's when these things were done. DeFalco was not a prude, but cautious about sexual material. Speaking of Tom DeFalco, I fondly remember his and Ron Friends' run on Thor. They just went right back to Kirby and Kirbyized the book again after Walt Simonson's run. I would include Walt here, but Walt was mostly 80s. But just fun, escapist, crazy, cosmic stories, done on that Kirby scale. And obviously you've got Ron Friends, inked by Brett Breeding, just, at the top of his form. And Tom and Ron, I know from talking to them on many, many occasions, they just probably giggled the whole time they were working on this. They were just so into it and so appreciative of the opportunity. And it shows on every page. Is it groundbreaking? Is it thought-provoking? Is it anything but a good old-fashioned good-time comic book? Probably not. But it's an excellent example of the form of a fine escapist comic book fantasy. And ain't nothing wrong with that, my friends. As for the worst of Marvel in the 90s, well, I have a kind of a rude way of referring to these comics, but basically they were all written by editors. And one editor would go to the other editor and say, I want to write a series for you. And then you write a series for me. And then the other guy, he'll write another series. And, we'll all edit each other and make some money. Because at this time, comics were selling out the wazoo. Every book was making money. And at this time at Marvel, the editors were sharing in royalties. So this allowed editors to write these, I'm sorry if you were a fan of these books. If you were a fan of these books, man, your rose-tinted glasses, must have come with a hit of Peruvian marching powder. But because these books are awful. They really are. But as awful as they were, they sold because comics were just selling like crazy. And at this time, editors shared in the royalty pool. So editors got a little taste of the comic book royalties as well. So these editors thought, well, hey, I'm going to double dip. I'm going to make royalties off of both ends. And that really was what prompted the creation of these books. And it's pretty damn obvious when you read them because they are as forgettable as hell. All right, Andrew Schweitzer. What are the right steps to get noticed by, anyone so I can start writing professionally? Should I make fan comics featuring characters owned by Marvel and DC? Should I focus on telling stories with my own characters? Or is it important to get any work out there? Well, I would say get any work out there. I would say no, do not create comics with established licensed characters. Your artist might get a job, but you're not going to get a job off of that. Because the comic companies always say to artists, draw the characters that we do. so we can see, your version of Iron Man, your version of, Batgirl. But writers, not so much. Writers, they're looking, number one, have you been published? That's an enormous thing for a writer. Have you been published? I remember when I tried to get into, I did get into children's books. The only published work I had was for basically a softcore porno comic, newsstand comic called Gasm. It was a really bad imitation of heavy metal. And I thought, well, I can't mention this to the children's book companies. And, so consequently, I got no work. Have you ever been published? No. I would deny that I'd ever been published, even though I had. And then eventually I said, yeah, I have. And I had samples in my portfolio because I was doing art as well, and showed it to them, and they didn't care. They didn't care what it was I was published in. I was published. Somebody had faith enough in me to pay me to do work. So and then I started working in children's books for a while based on that. So the thing is to get published, and getting published now is almost impossible because everybody needs a literary agent now. Everybody has an agent. I don't, but everybody has an agent. I have people who help me. I survive on the kindness of strangers, but I don't have an official agent. So the place to go is right here where you're watching this on the internet. I think the best example I can ever think of is Axe Cop, that comic that was created by some kid and then drawn by his dad. And his dad would illustrate the unfiltered scripts written by a 10 or 11-year-old. And it got them a lot of attention. Now, whether it led to more work for them, I really can't say. But it got them attention. Robert Kirkman, Walking Dead, he got attention by doing this crazy comic called Battle Pope. So that got him noticed. So it's just about being noticed. As a writer, it's tough because you got to work with an artist if you're doing comics. Fan fiction, I know some people that got hired doing fan fiction. Of course, for that, you don't need an artist. So yeah, it's tough, but you got to get, you got to just do something. Come up with some high concept craziness and get somebody to notice it. I feel bad for anybody trying to get into comics now. I spent years trying to get into comics when comics were selling poorly. And it was a really competitive field. And no one wanted to hire anybody, let alone me. And then in the 80s, we had the comics explosion. The first comic explosion, the second comic explosion in the 90s. And all of a sudden, they needed talent. They needed stories. They needed content. And that's when I got in. And it was a great time to get in because, man, everybody wanted to buy your stuff. If you could hit a deadline and tell a story that made sense and your characters were likable, they were all over you. I was turning offers down in the 80s and in the 90s. Today, it's tougher. So I don't envy you. I wish I had better advice, but I don't. Just keep plugging away. Just keep creating and keep putting stuff out there and see what happens. I mean, look, you see stuff on the streaming services all the time, and they tell you it's based on a comic. How many times did you say to yourself, I never even heard of that comic? I'm a comics fan, and I never heard of this comic. It's because somebody influential saw the comic. Somebody who had some juice saw the comic. It wasn't that it sold to 1 million people. It just was seen by the one right guy. If you look at, Men in Black is based on a comic. Did that comic sell very well? It was like a phenomenon when it came out? No, it wasn't. It was sort of a backbencher title that very few comic shops even carried. But somebody at one of the studios saw it and thought, hey, this would make a good movie. I like what I'm seeing here. And if you see the issues of Men in Black, you're like, wow, that's kind of a miracle. Because it wasn't that great looking a comic. It wasn't even that interesting looking a comic. And the idea of the Men in Black had sort of been in the zeitgeist. I'd been sort of drifting around for a while. Everybody knew about the Men in Black as a concept, these mysterious government agents. But here, this guy put it into a comic, and bingo. Hopefully made the big money. Big money, dollar bill. Christopher R. Taylor. I have just finished reading Darwin Cook's absolutely amazing Parker adaptations. He had 4 done and promised more, then his health failed him and he sadly died. Very sad. Darwin Cook's terrific guy, and he's a huge loss to the industry. I don't mean to editorialize on your question. An enormous, irreplaceable. It's like Buddy Holly, gone. Anyway. Why have there not been more of this kind of noir adaptations done? I know it takes a certain kind of extraordinary artist to do it right, but these stories are so great, and there are so many out there to tell. Darwin did a hell of a job. He loved this kind of material. Of course, he did a hell of a job on everything he worked on. I mean, he liked superheroes as a kid and liked reimagining them as an adult and the rest of it. But Parker is really, his Parker adaptations, adapted from the novels by Richard Stark, are obviously, for me, his magnum opus, because it's a different genre. He got it. He got the period. He got the feel. He got the hard-boiled, mojo of these things down. And he respected the original text. I mean, for the most part, he doesn't stray from what Donald Westlake wrote. And, I was a huge fan of these. I was very excited when I found out Darwin would be doing them. Because, you ever have like a favorite novel and it gets turned into a movie or a comic book by someone who just, doesn't have the talent. It's going to be crap. Well, when I heard that Darwin was going to be doing the Parker novels, I thought, we're in great shape. Now, when these things were coming out, they sold very well. They were a phenomenal success for IDW. Sold well internationally. I approached the Westlake estate about adapting the John Dortmunder novels because Dortmunder is sort of the flip side of Parker. If you've ever seen the movie The Hot Rock, that is about the Dortmunder gang. They're a bunch of screw-up professional thieves who just can never catch a break. They're the unluckiest criminals on planet Earth. Certainly the unluckiest criminals in fiction. And I approached IDW and even had some sample pages done. Once the Westlake estate gave me the go-ahead, they said, yeah, we'd be interested. We would greenlight that. We would be fine with that. And so I approached IDW. I had an artist draw up some sample pages. And their reasoning was, well, yeah, but you're not Darwin Cook. I said, well, I know I'm not Darwin Cook. I don't mean to say that these books would be as successful as the Parker adaptations. But they said if they were 10% as successful as the Parker adaptations, they would be profitable. They would still be profitable. And I said, and quite possibly they might do even better than that. They might do 20-30% of Darwin's sales if you got off your ass and marketed them a little bit. And I said, it's found money. And we have the Westlake estate's blessing. So why not build off the Parker stuff? And Darwin was for it. Why not build off the Parker stuff and, feed the audience that bought, because maybe the people buying the Parker things want more of this kind of material. But you run into this in comics all the time. It's kind of a star system. Now, Darwin deserved to be a comic book star, more so than a lot of people who are comic book stars. He absolutely deserved it. He absolutely earned it. His place in comic book history is assured. He is not an asterisk or a footnote. To me, he is a chapter. And but you see a lot of this where it's like, well, who are you to suggest we do this? And a lot of editors and publishers see it that way. Like, no, and I've often talked about how DC set up these monuments, where no comic will ever match Watchmen and Return of the Dark Knight for quality. And it's like, wow, you just, drew a line. You've set the bar and told everybody that they can never reach it. How is that encouraging your creative staff? How do you know what's coming down the pike? I mean, the generation before you thought that Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams Batman comics could never be topped. So it's, I don't know. I'm doing a lot of freelance whining. You don't want to hear it. Jordan Harrington. Anyway, Darwin Cook's Parker was genius. I agree with you. Why? And I just told you why they don't do any more of it. So, okay, Jordan Harrington, where did you get all the Gunny Lefferts quotes? Did you make them all up, or are they based on actual quotes? If you don't know who Gunny Lefferts is, he's a character in my Levon Cade novels. He's basically Levon's Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's a blind Marine drill instructor who saw Levon through SEER School. SEER School is what Special Forces go through. It's just basically this horrible survivalist torture. The inmates at Gitmo have never gone through anything as horrible as the volunteers go through to pass SEER School. And but Gunny Lefferts was there pushing Levon, molding Levon, honing Levon into the living weapon that he would become. And in a lot of the earlier novels, all the chapters open with a Gunny Lefferts quote. And the idea behind these quotes is that they would associate a bit with what was going on in the chapter that followed. And so these are things that Gunny Lefferts at one time had said to Levon Cade. And we can imagine, because I don't really get that much into Levon's inner self, his inner thoughts, we can imagine that Levon, while he's going through the actions of the chapter that follows, he's recalling these lessons from Gunny Lefferts about combat, about life, the Gunny Lefferts philosophy. And I've often been told these should be made into T-shirts. And then as the series wore on, I stopped using them, and it was intentional. I loved writing them, but I stopped using them because Levon had moved into a new phase in his life where he wasn't thinking so much on the past. He wasn't thinking about his experiences as a hunter-killer special ops guy. And he was moving away from that. And so I left the Gunny Lefferts quotes behind because they no longer had as much of a place in his life. I thought it was a natural progression. Now, the most recent novel that I'm writing now, called Levon's Scourge, Levon is very much back into being a hunter-killer, and the Gunny Lefferts quotes return. So you'll have a whole bunch of new ones. All of these are from Levon's Hunt. These are all from one novel. They were the headings of each chapter. So yeah, that's where they came from. Now, I'm kind of paraphrasing in some cases things I've heard people tell me that they were told by the drill instructor. I've been told a lot of amazing drill instructor stories, and gunnery sergeant stories throughout the years, and sort of collected them in my head, and then some of them I just make up, and some of them you find on military websites. Soldiers like quotes, from Sun Tzu to Julius Caesar to Ulysses S. Grant and Napoleon. They hardcore military fans, hardcore servicemen collect quotes as they go along. Things that the famous SEALs quote, nobody knows who first said it, a bad plan is better than no plan at all. Things like that. These aphorisms that are easy to remember and guide you. And that's the whole point. Gunny Lefferts' quotes, these recalled words from Gunny Lefferts, guide Levon through the tough times in his life. If you haven't read Levon, I've written 11 novels. As I said, I'm almost finished with the 12th novel. They're straight up vigilante justice action, but with a heart, because Levon has a family he has to look out for. He gets in all kinds of trouble. He's got to get out. He's got to survive for his daughters. So, hey, if you have a suggestion, question, comment, picture your doggy, picture your kitty, whatever, you send it to me at brunobookstore@gmail.com, brunobookstore@gmail.com. It is the most direct way to reach me. As I said, I got these questions off of Facebook, but they were all off of one thread, most of them, because I put out a solicit. I said, hey, anybody got any questions? And this long thread, which is probably going to be good for 4 more episodes, but that's rare. It's rare I'll pull them off of Facebook. But of course, I read every one because I'd asked for them. So brunobookstore@gmail.com, and you might want to, if you like this, you want to subscribe to this channel, you can also go over to Subscribestar and be a paying subscription member. In exchange for that, you get goodies. You get stuff. You get digital goodies and physical goodies, signed comics, tiny little minifigures, all kinds of crap I package up and send out to people who go over to Subscribestar and subscribe. Some of these are exclusive items you can get nowhere else but at Subscribestar. I really appreciate it. And while I got you, the Rambo First Kill novel from Splato Comics. This, I've been informed, will be out in April. It is heading to the printers. It's been fully colored and ready to go. It's a graphic novel about John Rambo's first tour of duty in Vietnam. And it is an action-packed, straight-up war story. It takes John Rambo from being an Arizona high school student to the jungles of South Vietnam in a desperate fight for survival as the Viet Cong tighten the noose around a remote fire base. And you'll see the evolution, the origin of John Rambo and who he was before and how he became the man that he became. It's an Indiegogo. It is, I told you, it's going to be out in April, but it will be in demand through the summer. So I probably shouldn't have said that. I probably should have said, call before midnight tonight. But, this is me. This is you. I'm always going to be honest with you. It'll be in demand throughout the summer. But you want to pick it up because the artwork is freaking gorgeous. Aaron Affleck, Butch Geis, Matt Barr, a bunch of other highly talented guys worked on that. You can see the artwork. It's jaw dropping. And even more so in color. So give it a whirl, my friends. And that's it from me. Thanks for liking, subscribing. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for helping me spread the word about this channel. And I'll see all of you down the road.